Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
Say hello to oyster bunnies.
Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John never wants to follow. Get ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
It is the BJ Show on a TGIM edition. Thank God it's Monday. And TGIJB. Thank God it's John Combest.
Well, that'd be JC, right? And JB would be Joe Biden.
What did I say? JB?
You said JB, which would be Joey Biden.
I'm sorry, man. It's Monday. I can screw up stuff like that, right? TGIJC. Okay. Man, what a start to the show. Okay, that is John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. You can spell his name on the computer, and you put a .com after it, johncombest.com, and you get his incredible website. Nothing fancy, no graphics, no videos, no dancing GIFs or anything like that. It's just chock full of stories that you need to know about, stuff that's going on in the state of Missouri. Sometimes 20, 30, 40, 50. Do you ever do 60 stories? You think you ever hear 60?
You know, the 60 number is one you threw out Friday, and my answer is the same, Brad. I don't have any idea. I imagine it's, probably in that ballpark.
How about 70, 80, or 90?
Yeah, 127, Brad. That's exactly how many every day.
We started off with the top three. We bring in...
I'm Casey Kasem.
And he starts it off with...
In third place...
A follow-up to a conversation we had on Friday, Brad, about vetting. All that controversy down in Vernon County. At least for now, it's reached a temporary resolution. On Friday night, yes, on a Friday night, members of the Vernon County Republican Central Committee were sworn in by Vernon County Associate Circuit Judge Brandon Fisher. This story, by the way, is brought to us by KSN Television, a.k.a. KODE, which, by the way, blocked me on Twitter several years ago. Maybe we could get back to that later. But the outlet that blocked me on Twitter said that these folks were actually officially sworn in on Friday. So the controversy, as it stands, the controversy may go on, but these folks are now officially, legally members of the Vernon County Republican Central Committee. And in fact, KSN notes that officials from the Missouri Republican Party were on hand on Friday night and do say, hey, these are our guys. These are the officially we give them their stamp of approval of being official Central Committee members, Brad. So if you heard a deep moaning coming from the central rear end on Friday, it may have been Mark McCloskey.
Okay, now, are these the legitimately elected people? Are these the people that claim that there was no legitimate election? Get what I'm saying?
These are the folks that said that we don't want vetting, that we want to be able to run regardless of it, whatever kind of policies and procedures or purity tests, whatever you want to call it. So these, Brad, you could consider these to be the maybe the outsiders, the ones that said they didn't like the vetting process.
And essentially, this is the new group of people. It's not the old people that went into
correct. You're correct, Brad. Yeah, and for folks who don't know, if you look back on our YouTube channel, we had Mark McCloskey, who, by the way, as we know, owns the world record for overhead military press, which he sat in high school and in college. World record holder and super attorney Mark McCloskey was on segment B on Friday and talked about the vetting process and why he believes it's a good thing to have in place for Republicans.
Hold on a minute. Were you serious about the world record?
Yeah.
So
we've talked about this at length on our show, Brad. On your old show, the BS show, with Shelley Barr,
right?
In one of Mark McCloskey's appearances, he and I'm going to look up exactly the date here.
John's got it all.
On one of his appearances on your show, he talked about how let me bring up the date real quick. Oh yeah. So when he was on the BS show that you and Shelley did, for listeners who don't know, Brad used to have a show for 4 years with Shelley Barr. on Westplex 107.1. On December 15th, Mark McCloskey was on your show, Brad, and he was talking about how at the time he was 66, and he talked about how you asked him how he stayed in such good shape, and he said it was, quote, clean living. Sure. And then he talked about his peak of military pressing nearly 450 pounds, because he said when he would work out, he would rep with at least 3 pounds his body weight when he was in high school. That's an overhead press of 450 pounds. Now, in the modern era, Brad, a gentleman named, and I linked to this the next day, a gentleman named Paul Anderson, he attempted a 406-pound standing overhead press and couldn't do it because he's no Mark McCloskey in high school, Brad.
But,
so anyway, go ahead, Brad.
So to get back to your point, he doesn't have the world record, correct? I believe Mark McCloskey. Listen, he has his body from clean living, and he set a 450-pound world record for standing overhead military press when he was in high school. Now, it's technically not noted by bodybuilding experts, Brad, but yeah, he's a world record holder. And the fact that he doesn't brag about it, except when he's on your show with Shelley, shows his humility, I think, Brad. Did you know he lives in a big house? I think I'm being punked. Okay. On to number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
If you've ever seen somebody wheeled out of a government building, Brad, you might think, oh no, there was a tragedy. Oh no, they had a paper cut. Well, in St. Louis City on Thursday, a member of the city administration, personnel director Sonia Jenkins Gray, had a medical issue, and her husband, Brad, says that it was stress-induced. Now, we know the culprit, and I'll just cut to the chase. This story is brought to us, by the way, by Austin Hugelet from the Post-Dispatch. It was on the Post-Dispatch website Saturday. And State Auditor Scott Fitzpatrick is auditing the personnel department. There were a whole bunch of complaints about office management. And this woman, Personnel Director Sonia Jenkins Gray, was feeling pretty stressed on Thursday. And she was wheeled out and was taken by ambulance. She left by ambulance that day. Her husband said, didn't want to go into detail, but says it was indeed stress-related. So Miss Jenkins Gray has had a little bit of a tiff, it appears, with Tashara Jones. Tashara Jones essentially wants to get a little bit more control over the personnel director's office. According to this Post-Dispatch piece by Austin, it's almost impossible to fire a personnel director. Like, there are some safeguards set up around the office so that you can't just bring in a new personnel director whenever you want and change all the rules and all the hiring practices. Anyway, so there's been a little tiff, it appears, between Sonia Jenkins Gray and Mayor Tashara Jones. And with the heat of this state investigation about mismanagement, it appears that on Thursday, the stress might have gotten to Sonia Jenkins Gray, and she left. She went on medical leave last week, and she left the office in an ambulance on Thursday. So the takeaway, Brad, and I think most people probably don't care that much about St. Louis city politics, but I think the effects are statewide, and that I think if Auditor Fitzpatrick is doing an audit, I think he needs to provide some medical help, some medical support, and maybe something in the realm of stress management for people who believe in panic attacks. Like how a lot of women say they have panic attacks. If you believe in panic attacks, maybe he needs to provide a little bit of medical support in terms of whether staff or budget in that regard, Brad. So that was a big story on Saturday.
Why don't they just do a deal with one of the marijuana places in the city, and they could come in? And,
that's a great idea.
And give everybody gummies, and okay, I know you're under stress, but you know what? Just kick back and just take this gummy, and in a half an hour, you won't care anymore. You'll just be, it's another day at work. I can't believe I'm here. It's so wonderful. I love my job. That's what it'll be like, right?
I think that maybe they could work out a deal with Pfizer where you could get also like a China virus shot or a booster, whatever they're calling it now. So you could get the Columbia Missourian had a piece up yesterday too. You can get the new China virus booster. They had a pretty cool promo about that. You're right, Brad. Maybe there's something that you could do on the medicinal, on the herbal sense. So yeah, I think it's only right. I hope somebody in Fitzpatrick's office is looking into and really weighing the stress that they cause folks when they do an audit, and I think the human part of that is often overlooked, Brad.
And an aside, I'll make a note here. Remind me to talk about Dr. Fauci, but we won't do it right now because it doesn't.
Oh, yes, okay.
Doesn't necessarily pertain to what we're doing. So we're up to
The number one.
You better watch yourself, Brad, because new state laws take effect on Wednesday. You are a noted scofflaw, and many of these laws might apply to you. Now, some of them are real boring. You know, they have to do with like education funding and stuff like that. But stuff that you might care about is stuff like in the new crime proposal, I should say the new crime laws, increases the age at which juveniles can be tried as adults from 14, or it takes it to 14 from the previous 12. So little scofflaws, little future Brad Hildebrands have 2 years to be little miscreants before they're charged as adults. And Brad, something that's really cool for you is that the new law prevents a court from issuing an arrest warrant for someone for failing to pay a traffic ticket. So, Brad, next time you're just rolling through Calverton Park and you're just, probably texting while driving and you get a ticket, you can't have an arrest warrant put out for you just for not paying your traffic ticket. That's good news for you, right, Brad?
Is that the entire state? Is that a state law?
Yeah, that's the entire state. Because really, there's a Brad Hildebrand in every corner of the state, Brad.
Well, the crazy part of this is, okay, I can see it both ways. We talked about this thing with the deal with Nelly out at Maryland Heights and Hollywood Casino. Okay, and let me just, what John's saying, and let me try to, some people might be going, okay, I don't know exactly what he's talking about. And it's not that complicated, but you get a traffic ticket. There's a date on there for you to show up for court. Okay, if you don't show up for court, they issue what they call an FTA, a failure to appear warrant, which means it goes in the computer system. So if the next time you get pulled over by the police and they run your driver's license and it comes back that you have a warrant out for your arrest, before you know what hits you, you're going to be in handcuffs in the back of a Ford Explorer, okay, because of the fact that there is a warrant out for your arrest, which essentially is what happened to Nelly on somewhat what was it? He had an insurance violation. Wasn't that what it was?
Driving dirty. Well, not driving dirty, but he didn't have his insurance paperwork.
He didn't have insurance paperwork with him, and they gave him a ticket. He didn't show up for the court appearance. So the interesting thing on this is that pendulum swings both ways. So now, what's the incentive? If you get a traffic ticket, what's your incentive for paying that ticket? Nothing, right? I mean, you just say, I'm not going to pay it. Because what are they going to do to you if they're not going to issue a warrant for your arrest? So I don't know. Who passed that bill? Whose bill was that?
I think that was it was signed by Governor Bill Eigel.
Governor Bill Eigel.
And it was approved by County Executive Mike Elam, who, by the way, was a guest on Scott Fawn's This Week in Missouri Politics. Scott was out, but guest host Wendy Hausman, by the way, who's from St. Peters, Brad. You real quick, Brad, you bring up a good point, which is about warrants and people not being able, either not wanting or not being able to pay them. The show Columbia Today, which is done by KFRU, it's hosted by a guy named Ted Farnan. An incoming state senator named Stephen Weber was on the show on Friday, and he was talking about the homeless issue in Columbia, which is a big deal. And, people panhandling and people being in the traffic medians. And Stephen's point was, what are you going to do? You give these people, you give them a ticket, you fine them. They're not going to pay the fine. Then they're going to be in more trouble for not paying the fine. I'm paraphrasing what the guy said on the show. But you're right, Brad. I mean, I think there's a reasonable medium there of you don't want to put these people who can't pay in a cycle of debt. But on the other hand, why would you ever pay a ticket if there's not going to be any consequences?
Okay, John, and I know we had him on last week. Would you be against me texting Mike Carter and asking him if he'd come on the air again and talk about this?
Because we did not have Mike Carter on last week, but we had him on
week before,
a while back. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. By all means, text him.
Okay. Here. When the next break, I'll text him because he's the expert on this. Because for two reasons: A, he runs his own law firm which specializes in traffic tickets, and B, he's a municipal judge in Wentzville. So he sees both sides of the equation. He sees the people that get the tickets that come to him, the DWIs and stuff like that, to his law firm, and yet he adjudicates them in court. And you know what? He seems like he talked about this, and I've heard people compliment him. He seems like a pretty fair kind of guy. Remember, I asked him the question about if a guy shows up in your court in cutoffs and a wife beater and flip flops, and another guy shows up in your court in a nice tailored suit, do you give preference one guy over the other? And he essentially said, well, yes and no. And remember how he talked about that? He said that it wouldn't be fair for him to give preference to the person who was nicely dressed. But by the same token, he thinks people should show up dressed, shall we say, a little bit better than what if you ever been in at least some of these muni courts. It's just sort of bizarre. People are going like, okay, don't they think that they're almost like giving the third phalanges to the court and maybe that's why they do it, by, showing up the way they're dressed. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's intentional disrespect. I think that's who they are. And I think they would show up to, their grandmother's wake wearing the same thing. And I think they would show up to an outdoor event at Six Flags.
I guess.
And by the way, Brad, we should just correct your lingo because it's a spouse beater. And you're assuming gender when you say wife beater.
There are times John corrects me. I won't go there. Okay. We'll end this segment. Let's talk briefly about Dr. Fauci. Have you ever heard this crazy story with Dr. Fauci?
I've heard crazy stories, but nothing recently, Brad.
He just got out of the hospital.
Oh, did he have West Nile?
Yes.
Or he had some legitimate thing. So like not COVID, but like a real disease.
Don't you think it's sort of weird that the guy who is head of the infectious, or whatever he was, the NIH or the infectious disease head or whatever he was, and he gets West Nile virus? And,
yeah. Well, he's just out there playing with the skeeters. You know what I'm saying?
And if you know, West Nile virus is can most of the time, I think it's almost all the time, is carried by mosquitoes. And when the mosquito has the virus and he puts his little stinger into you, he injects you with West Nile virus and you get it. And I think I read over the weekend, I read the story that 80% of the people have little or no reaction to it, but other people can get very sick and die. I will tell you a very sad story involving one of my sons. One of his good friends, his mother was being treated for cancer, and actually she was doing very good, but she had to have blood transfusions. And this was this is probably, 15, 20 years ago, before the West Nile thing was really, understood and people really knew what was going on with this. Anyway, when she had her chemo, she would always have like a blood transfusion, and she went into the hospital, usual thing, and she was making great progress with her cancer, and then all of a sudden she had her blood transfusion, and she got very, very ill, and unfortunately died. And when they did the autopsy, they essentially found out that the blood supply at that point in time, that the blood that she had was infected with West Nile virus. And
oh, wow.
Which at the time, I don't think when they were doing the blood donations, they were screening for that. Because, when you give blood, actually, did you ever give blood? Were you a blood donor?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I'm not giving my blood to anybody.
I've done it, dozens of times. And it's sort of fascinating, the whole procedure and the whole bit. There's an interesting part of that procedure, which, and part of the reason I know probably a little bit more about it than the average person is because Mercy Hospital System has at least this is back in the day, I don't know if they still do this or not, they have their own blood system where they try not to take any blood from American Red Cross. They actually have their own donations, and we used to do stuff for them like twice a year. We'd do a blood drive, and they'd take me behind the scenes, and it was sort of interesting because, they say, well, supply of blood is low. One day they took me into this big old refrigerator where they keep all the blood, and when they were saying their supplies were low, they weren't kidding. The shelves were pretty much empty, and this is the blood that they keep at the hospital. So if someone comes in a traumatic injury or someone has an operation where they need a transfusion or stuff like that, and you go like, okay, when you hear people say, well, our blood supply is low, you don't think, yeah, right, they're just saying blood supply is low.
Hey, Brad, I know we're up against the end of break, and we're clearly not ending early here. But I've been in that exact same room. And the crazy thing was when we walked in, the most surprising thing is to see Sam Page hanging upside down from the ceiling.
Why did I know that was going somewhere? No, that's what happens when you go to your bank and you see Dr. Page hanging upside down in the vault because he's taken all your money. That's what he's done. It's not your blood.
Hey, U.S. Bank branch closed in Spanish Lake. I was going to send you a screenshot of the news, Brad. Very sad. You probably remember that location is 99% of people don't care. But you know the U.S. Bank I'm talking about, which is right there off of Larimore when you get off of Bell Fountain. And they sent a very sad letter that was like, Stuff and reasons and viability by. So, another anchor of Spanish Lake is gone now, Brad.
Interesting. Well, I knew Spanish Lake was going downhill when they closed Ronnie's barbershop. I mean, that was how it went. That was my first indicator. You know what I'm saying?
It was and then Ponticello's, and then it was all downhill, Brad.
Yeah. Two old North County guys. Okay, we're going to take a break.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?